Your phone vibrates against the desk as a digital notification slides across the top right of your monitor. Two new urgent emails hit your inbox before you can even open the first message. In a fraction of a second, your amygdala, the brain's primal threat detection center, fires an evolutionary alarm. Your adrenal glands pump cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream, accelerating your heart rate and shallowing your breath. This intense physiological reaction is the neurobiology of modern corporate burnout. We are living in an era of hyperconnectivity, where our nervous systems are hijacked by the relentless demands of the digital workplace. This is a state of perpetual fight or flight, triggered not by a predator in the brush, but by a red notification badge. The human brain was simply not designed to process an endless barrage of shifting priorities, urgent requests, and micro-interruptions. The inevitable result is a profound, paralyzing exhaustion that a weekend of sleep cannot fix. Try to manage this overwhelming sensory input by working harder, staying later, and obsessively checking our devices. We falsely believe that if we just clear the inbox and answer every message, we will finally earn a moment of peace. But the notifications never stop, revealing an infinite treadmill of deliverables designed to extract maximum output. This hyperconnectivity creates a dangerous illusion of control, tricking us into thinking that our constant vigilance can tame the chaos. When we inevitably fail to control the uncontrollable, we experience a deep sense of inadequacy and complete task paralysis. To find a way out of this modern psychological trap, we must look backward to the ancient world. Nearly 2,000 years ago, an exclusive historical figure named Epictetus discovered the ultimate antidote to overwhelming external pressure. Epictetus was not a wealthy CEO or an isolated monk. He was born into slavery in the brutal Roman Empire. He possessed absolutely no physical autonomy, as his body, his labor, and his daily schedule were entirely dictated by a cruel master. Yet, despite these chains, he cultivated a level of absolute mental sovereignty that modern executives would pay millions to achieve. He formulated a devastatingly simple but profound philosophy known as the dichotomy of control. According to Epictetus, the universe is divided into two strict categories: things that are up to us and things that are not. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, and our aversions, these controllable inputs are entirely within our domain. Everything else, our bodies, our property, our reputations, and the actions of others, is fundamentally outside of our direct command. Epictetus taught that all human suffering, anxiety, and burnout stem from a single, fatal error: confusing these two categories. When we attach our peace of mind to external events we cannot command, we voluntarily hand over our freedom and become slaves to circumstance. Consider the daily reality of a modern mid-level tech project manager. His screen is a chaotic, claustrophobic mosaic of rapid-cut UI overlays and unread Slack threads demanding immediate status updates. Q3 deliverables have shifted for the third time this month due to upper management's sudden change in corporate strategy. His deadlines are mathematically impossible, yet he feels entirely responsible for the project's ultimate success or failure. This manager is paralyzed by the noise, sitting at his desk with a racing heart, unable to start a single task. He is trying to mentally manage 1,000 moving parts that are fundamentally outside of his jurisdiction. His burnout is not just a symptom of overwork. It is a direct result of violating Epictetus's core rule. He is emotionally tethered to the shifting whims of the executive board and the unpredictable moods of his cross-functional teams. Every time a deadline is arbitrarily moved, he registers it as a personal failure and a threat to his survival. His mental energy is entirely consumed by fighting the reality of his corporate environment. He is trying to force the universe to conform to his ideal project timeline. By attempting to control the uncontrollable, he has surrendered his internal sovereignty to the company. To rescue ourselves from this task paralysis, we must adopt the Stoic metaphor of the archer. Imagine a master practitioner standing on a windy plain, preparing to fire an arrow at a distant target. The archer has complete, absolute control over his preparation and his physical form. He controls the selection of the arrow, the tension of the draw, the steadiness of his stance, and the exact moment of the release. This is his effort, his domain of absolute sovereignty where no external force can interfere. But the very millisecond the arrow leaves the bowstring, his control evaporates instantly. A sudden gust of wind could alter the trajectory, or the target itself could move out of the way. The master archer accepts this stark reality completely and without resentment. He does not tie his self-worth to whether the arrow ultimately hits the bull's. He ties his satisfaction entirely to the perfection of his process and the integrity of his execution. He focuses solely on drawing the bow and taking the shot to the absolute best of his ability. He wholly surrenders the arrow's flight to the universe, detaching his ego from the final outcome. If a sudden crosswind blows the arrow off course, the archer does not collapse in despair or curse the wind. He simply reaches into his quiver, draws another arrow, and calmly resets his stance. This is the exact mental shift required to survive the hyperconnected corporate landscape. We must fiercely separate our internal effort from the external outcome. For the tech project manager, upper management's shifting Q3 strategies and the impossible deadlines are simply the wind. The market's reaction to his product is the target, which he cannot hold still. Agonizing over these external forces only drains the vital energy he needs to effectively draw the bow. His stance and draw are the quality of his focus, the clarity of his communication, and his daily work ethic. When a sudden barrage of Slack messages demands a pivot, he must not view it as a catastrophic failure. Instead, he must see it as a shift in the wind, calmly adjusting his aim without emotional attachment to where the arrow lands. To make this philosophical shift actionable, we can implement a structural framework called the dichotomy matrix. This is a visual triage system designed to instantly categorize corporate stressors before they trigger a cortisol response. Take a blank sheet of paper or open a digital whiteboard and draw a hard line down the center. Label the left column, "My bow," strictly reserving this space for controllable inputs like your tone, your prioritization, and your boundary setting. Label the right column, "The wind," dedicating this side to uncontrollable demands like the CEO's mood swings and the volume of incoming messages. When the digital onslaught begins and the UI overlays start stacking up, you must pause and ruthlessly sort your anxiety. If a stressor belongs in the wind column, you must actively practice letting it go. Acknowledge it, account for it in your planning, but refuse to let it dictate your internal weather. You cannot control the volume of Slack pings, but you can control whether you turn on "Do Not Disturb" to complete a deep work task. You cannot control the shifting Q3 deliverable, but you can control how professionally you document the resulting delay. By forcing your brain to categorize these stressors, you physically interrupt the amygdala's panic response. You shift your cognitive load from helpless anxiety to empowered, deliberate action. Picture the stark visual contrast between these two states of mind. On one side, the claustrophobic, rapid-cut anxiety of a screen filled with red notification badges and urgent pop-ups. On the other side, the serene, slow-motion footage of a bowstring releasing, the muscles of the archer perfectly relaxed as the arrow flies into the unknown. This visual juxtaposition is the tranquility Epictetus discovered while bound in physical chains. It is the profound realization that true power is not about bending the external corporate world to your will. When you master the dichotomy matrix, the hyperconnected workplace loses its grip on your nervous system. You step into the office not as a victim of notification overload, but as a sovereign practitioner of your craft. You are the archer, focusing entirely on the draw, the stance, and the release, letting the corporate wind howl around you. But what happens when that howling corporate wind takes the form of deliberate malice and calculated human cruelty? Letting go of shifting project deadlines is one thing, but maintaining absolute internal tranquility when a colleague actively sabotages your reputation requires an entirely different, far more robust psychological armor. To survive the venom of a truly toxic work culture, we must elevate our mental defense from the passive acceptance of external events to the active, aggressive practice of cognitive reframing. For this crucial evolution, we must leave the metaphorical chains of the ancient slave and ascend to the absolute pinnacle of global power. We must look to the private, blood-stained diaries of a Roman emperor who ruled over a fractured, treacherous world, tasked with managing the most difficult, deceitful personalities in human history. This historical figure held the most powerful position on the planet, commanding vast, brutal legions across unforgiving, frozen frontiers. Yet, his reign was defined not by the expected luxury of a palace, but by grueling military campaigns, devastating plagues, and profound political betrayals from his closest, most trusted allies. In the freezing mud of ancient Roman military encampments, illuminated only by flickering oil lamps and the distant fires of enemy lines, he penned his deepest thoughts in a journal now known as the Meditations. This text was never meant to be a book written for public consumption, nor was it a performative display of philosophical clout for the elite class. It was the desperate, intimate survival manual of a man actively trying to keep his mind from fracturing under the crushing weight of immense betrayal, systemic incompetence, and the agonizing isolation of leadership. The emperor recognized early on that human toxicity is as predictable and inevitable as the changing of the seasons, and fighting it is a foolish waste of vital energy. He wrote extensively to himself, fiercely reminding his own mind that upon waking, he would inevitably encounter the meddling, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the dishonest, and the profoundly jealous. Instead of being shocked, offended, or wounded by their predictable behavior, he built an impenetrable cognitive architecture designed specifically to internalize their malice without any emotional taxation. He fundamentally understood that expecting bad people not to do bad things is the ultimate form of self-inflicted madness, an irrational demand that the universe bend to our moral preferences. This ancient, battle-tested historical blueprint is the exact antidote needed to survive the relentless, invisible psychological warfare of the modern corporate boardroom. Consider the daily torment of an advertising executive who is hopelessly trapped in a hyper-competitive, cutthroat agency environment. The visual reality of her workday is a continuous series of moody, high-contrast boardroom confrontations, where heavy shadows seem to intentionally swallow the light and amplify the tension. She reports directly to a gaslighting, deeply insecure micromanaging boss who systematically dismantles her professional confidence to mask his own glaring creative inadequacies. Every brilliant pitch she builds late into the night is either violently torn apart in front of her snickering peers or quietly stolen and presented to the high-paying client as his own independent genius. The emotional toll of this relentless, calculated psychological abuse leaves her dreading the morning alarm clock, her stomach tied in excruciating knots before she even steps out of the safety of her bed. If she relies solely on the naive hope for a better boss, a fairer workplace, or a sudden intervention from human resources, she will be entirely crushed by the brutal reality of her situation. Her natural biological instinct is to shrink away from the conflict, to become hyper-defensive, and to let the profound injustice of the stolen credit completely consume her limited mental bandwidth. Every stolen idea and every harsh, unfounded critique chips away at her baseline self-worth, leaving her feeling like a helpless, paralyzed victim in a deeply hostile corporate ecosystem. She is currently operating like a small, fragile candle left completely exposed on a drafty windowsill during a violent, unpredictable storm. The slightest gust of toxic behavior from her management team easily blows out her flickering flame, instantly plunging her into a dark void of professional despair and anxiety. To survive this psychological gauntlet and reclaim her sanity, she must fundamentally alter her relationship with the obstacles placed in her path, adopting the emperor's core, transformative metaphor of the fire. The ancient leader astutely observed that while a tiny, weak flame is instantly extinguished by the wind, a massive, roaring fire behaves entirely differently when confronted with the exact same elements. A blazing, uncontainable inferno does not shrink from the howling wind, nor does it cower from the heavy debris thrown carelessly into its center. Instead, It violently and hungrily consumes everything in its path, using the very obstacles meant to smother it as highly combustible fuel to burn even brighter and hotter. The roaring fire turns the assault into a massive tactical advantage, transforming the destructive, chaotic energy of the wind into its own expanding, unstoppable power. The besieged advertising executive must consciously choose to become this roaring fire, employing the specific tactic of cognitive reframing to completely alter how her brain processes her boss's daily toxicity. When her micromanaging director launches into a predictable, gaslighting tirade about her supposed incompetence, she must no longer absorb the venomous words as a legitimate attack on her fundamental value. Instead, she actively visualizes his cruelty and manipulation as a dry, brittle log being tossed directly into her blazing, internal furnace. She forcefully reframes the harsh, unfair critiques not as deeply personal failures, but as heavy, necessary resistance training designed specifically to build her emotional resilience. Every single time he steals credit for her successful campaign, she registers it as just another repetition in the mental gym of stoic indifference, deliberately strengthening her ability to detach her fragile ego from external validation. This profound cognitive shift completely neutralizes the toxic boss's psychological power over her, rendering his manipulation tactics entirely ineffective. He genuinely believes he is successfully breaking her spirit and asserting dominance, completely unaware that he is actually serving as her unwitting, highly effective sparring partner in the perfection of her personal character. Because of this reframing, she begins to view the moody, high-contrast boardroom not as a terrifying execution chamber, but as a controlled proving ground to test the strength of her philosophical armor. The glaring incompetence and constant betrayal of her ruthless colleagues are no longer experienced as shocking violations of workplace fairness. They are simply expected, calculated variables factored into her daily emotional equation. She is no longer a helpless victim bleeding out in a toxic agency, but an untouchable, clinical observer studying the deeply flawed, predictable nature of the human animal. To fully operationalize this defensive mindset and guarantee its effectiveness, she implements a brutal, step-by-step psychological workshop during her morning commute, utilizing the ancient practice known as Premeditatio Malorum, or the premeditation of evils. As she sits quietly on the train, watching the gray city blur past the window, she deliberately and systematically visualizes the absolute worst-case scenarios awaiting her at the office. She strictly refuses to engage in the delusion of toxic positivity or manifest a peaceful, harmonious day. Instead, she mentally rehearses the exact, painful moment her boss will inevitably hijack the morning's hostile status meeting. She vividly imagines his condescending tone of voice, the specific, targeted insults he will likely use, and the infuriating, silent complicity of her cowardly coworkers who refuse to intervene. By simulating this psychological ambush in the total safety of her own mind, she completely disarms the physiological shock value of the actual event before it even occurs. During this daily mental workshop, she meticulously maps out her precise internal response to this simulated attack, scripting her stoic indifference before she even scans her badge at the corporate lobby turnstile. She decides in advance exactly how slowly she will breathe, how she will consciously relax the tension in her shoulders, and how she will maintain an unbroken, unbothered gaze when the screaming begins. When she finally steps into the cold, glass-walled conference room and the expected hostility inevitably erupts, her heart rate does not spike, and her amygdala remains perfectly calm. The boss's venomous, gaslighting words land completely harmlessly against the thick, impenetrable psychological armor she forged on the morning train ride. She has effectively time-traveled, experiencing the emotional pain beforehand, so that the living reality feels like nothing more than a boring, predictable rerun of a terrible movie she has already seen a dozen times. The visual pacing of her internal life dramatically shifts from the claustrophobic, reactive terror of the boardroom to the quiet, highly disciplined fortitude of an ancient Roman military encampment. She stands tall amidst the chaotic corporate battlefield, completely surrounded by the mud, noise, and treachery of incompetent leadership, yet entirely insulated from its corrosive, soul-destroying effects. The blatant gaslighting and the shameless stolen credit continue unabated, but they no longer possess the necessary leverage to extract an emotional tax from her spirit. She has fully mastered the ancient alchemy of the roaring fire, eagerly consuming the toxicity of others to fuel her own ascent. She burns brightly and fiercely, deeply indifferent to whatever treacherous debris the agency throws into her flames. But surviving the blatant toxicity of a hostile boardroom is only half the battle. What happens when the corporate threat is not a screaming boss or a stolen pitch, but a quiet, comfortable, highly lucrative cage? We must confront the insidious, creeping existential dread that accompanies the modern phenomenon known as the golden handcuffs. This is the profound, paralyzing career apathy that strikes when your bank account is overflowing, but your fundamental human soul is entirely bankrupt. To navigate this luxurious despair and reclaim our humanity, we must turn to a vastly different historical perspective. We look to a man who did not write from the physical chains of slavery or the freezing mud of a military camp, but from the opulent, marble-floored halls of an ancient imperial court. This philosopher was a profoundly wealthy power broker, an elite political advisor who amassed a staggering personal fortune while simultaneously preaching the virtues of Stoicism. He lived a highly dangerous, paradoxical dual life, navigating the treacherous, blood-soaked heights of high society while desperately clinging to his philosophical principles. Because he intimately understood the seductive, hollow promises of immense wealth and power, he serves as the perfect, isolated historical lens for examining high-paying, soul-crushing modern careers. He recognized long ago that the ultimate currency of human existence is not gold or societal status, but the unrenewable, fleeting resource of time. Consider the tragic, daily reality of a senior corporate lawyer operating at the absolute zenith of his prestigious metropolitan firm. He earns a massive, seven-figure salary, wears impeccably tailored bespoke suits, and commands an expansive corner office with a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. Yet, beneath this flawless, highly curated veneer of undeniable success, he is suffering from a chronic, deeply depressive burnout that no amount of money can cure. He is profoundly misaligned with his personal virtues, spending 80 hours a week defending predatory corporations and facilitating ruthless, monopolistic mergers. He has tragically traded his fleeting, irreplaceable mortal hours for a luxury vehicle he barely has time to drive, and a sprawling, empty mansion he only uses to sleep. He rationalizes this profound squandering of personal time by pointing exclusively to his massive end-of-year bonuses and his highly coveted equity partnership. He is desperately clinging to our core philosophical metaphor of the river, but he has fundamentally misunderstood the terrifying nature of the water. The river represents the relentless, unrenewable, and entirely indifferent current of time, sweeping every single human life toward an inevitable, unavoidable conclusion. Instead of bravely navigating this current, the lawyer is desperately clutching the muddy riverbanks, utterly terrified of letting go of the earth. These riverbanks are the illusory safety nets of corporate status, quarterly distributions, and the superficial, fleeting admiration of his equally miserable peers. He genuinely believes that by clutching these static, material milestones, he can somehow pause the relentless, terrifying flow of his own mortality. But the river of time does not care about his impressive billable hours, his prestigious title, or the size of his investment portfolio. It simply continues to rush past him, steadily eroding his youth and vitality. Picture the stark, cinematic time-lapse visuals of his life's supposed ultimate rewards. An expensive, diamond-encrusted luxury watch slowly tarnishing, a high-end sports car gathering thick dust in a dark garage, and the premium leather of his designer briefcase cracking and fading into uselessness. Contrast these decaying, ultimately meaningless luxury items with the immutable, powerful, and crystal-clear flow of rushing water constantly moving beneath them. The water never stops, never negotiates a better deal, and never grants a legal extension on the ultimate, final deadline of a human lifespan. The ancient power broker wrote extensively about this exact human tragedy in his brilliant letters on the shortness of life, a text that perfectly maps onto our modern, exhausting obsession with quarterly earnings cycles. He astutely observed that men are fiercely protective of their financial capital, violently guarding their physical property and real estate from thieves and casual trespassers. Yet, when it comes to their time, the absolute only possession for which it is truly right and noble to be stingy, they hand it out freely to anyone who demands it. The modern lawyer willingly sacrifices his quiet evenings, his restful weekends, and his daughter's piano recitals to appease the artificial, entirely fabricated urgency of Q3 projections and Q4 shareholder meetings. He is systematically bankrupting his most precious, unrenewable asset just to inflate a corporate balance sheet for a firm that will replace him the very week he retires. To break free from the agonizing grip of the golden handcuffs and cure this severe career apathy, the lawyer must finally find the courage to let go of the riverbank. He must stop desperately clutching the decaying, rotting roots of corporate prestige and boldly step into the floating boat of his own authentic existence. Letting go does not necessarily mean immediately quitting his high-paying job, abandoning his responsibilities, and burning his career to the ground in a fit of dramatic rebellion. It means fundamentally shifting his psychological relationship with his daily labor, choosing to actively steer his boat with deliberate, intentional virtue rather than being violently dragged underwater by the current. He must deeply internalize that true, unshakable wealth is found solely in the sovereign control of his own attention, not in the passive, automatic accumulation of a year-end financial bonus. To fully operationalize this profound realization, we must implement a definitive, structural mechanism known as the Seneca Time Audit. This is not a standard corporate calendar trick, nor is it a superficial productivity hack designed to squeeze more billable hours out of a tired Tuesday afternoon. It is a ruthless, unflinching philosophical accounting of exactly where your actual life force is bleeding out into the meaningless void of performative overtime. You must sit down with a blank physical ledger and rigorously track every single hour of your week, categorizing them not by billing codes, but by strict spiritual alignment. You must identify exactly where you are carelessly squandering your unrenewable time on tasks, meetings, and emails that offer absolutely zero intrinsic value to your soul. The senior lawyer courageously applies this audit to his own life and is utterly horrified to discover the sheer volume of his squandered existence. He realizes he spends 15 hours a week in performative, late evening meetings just to visually prove his undying dedication to the firm's demanding managing partners. He clearly sees that his chronic, heavy depression stems directly from this voluntary theft, allowing his corporate masters to mercilessly pillage the time that rightfully belongs to his family and his own failing physical health. Armed with the undeniable, mathematically proven data of his Seneca Time Audit, he begins to establish a rigid, impenetrable boundary between his corporate labor and his true, restorative leisure. When the clock strikes 6, he does not passively ask for permission to leave. He simply closes his laptop, mentally severs his connection to the firm, and walks out the door into the evening air. He begins to treat his personal evenings with the exact same fierce, uncompromising, and aggressive protection that a billionaire applies to his secret offshore bank accounts. By reclaiming his time so aggressively, the lawyer stops fighting the inevitable river and finally begins to navigate the rushing current with profound purpose and virtue. The golden handcuffs completely lose their existential, suffocating grip, transforming from a source of depressive dread into a simple, highly manageable economic exchange for his specific legal skills. He still performs his professional duties with absolute excellence, but he no longer confuses his financial net worth with his inherent self-worth, nor his billable hours with his life's ultimate, meaningful purpose. He has successfully learned the ultimate, timeless lesson of the ancient power broker. Life is not inherently short, but we tragically make it so by carelessly throwing it away on things that do not matter. We must all stop desperately clinging to the muddy riverbanks of corporate status, bravely grab the oars of our own existence, and sail deliberately toward a life of genuine meaning. Thank you so much for watching this comprehensive deep dive into the practical application of ancient philosophy for modern corporate burnout. If you found lasting value in this journey and want to continue exploring the powerful intersection of historical wisdom and modern life, please subscribe to the channel right now. Leave a comment below letting me know which specific concept helped you the most, and share this video with someone who might be trapped in their own corporate river. Until next time, guard your unrenewable time fiercely, and always remember to steer your boat with unwavering virtue.